My mom laughed that I'd never match my brother, right after I'd sent $180,000 home over 5 years. When she said, "What money?" I realized he'd stolen every dollar, so I opened an audit. My mother chuckled, not laughed, not smiled, chuckled. The specific sound a person makes when something is both slightly funny and not worth taking seriously, the sound of mild, affectionate dismissal, the sound of someone who has decided where you rank and finds the arrangement perfectly reasonable. "You'll never be quite as good as your brother," she said, "but we love you anyway." I set my fork down. The table was the same table it had always been. Same china, same centerpiece my mother had been using since 1987. My father to her left, cutting his turkey into the small, even pieces that I had been watching him cut for 38 years. My brother Michael across from me, in from Cleveland for the holiday, wearing the expression I had privately named his hospital hallway smile, warm, measured, professionally calibrated for maximum likability. 15 years of swallowed sentences came up in one clean motion. "Then tell him to pay the bills," I said. "I'm not sending money anymore." My mother blinked. "What money, Beverly?" Her voice was genuinely confused, not defensive, not guilty, confused. "We haven't received a single dollar from you." The table went quiet in a way I had not experienced before at that table. My father's fork paused over his plate. Michael smiled his smile. Nobody flinched, nobody corrected her, because she meant it. My mother genuinely, completely, without any performance of ignorance, had no idea. I drove 3 hours back to Cambridge with the radio off. I do not drive without the radio as a general rule. I find silence in cars tends to give thoughts too much room to run, and I am someone who prefers to manage that. But that night, the silence felt necessary, felt like the only honest response to what I was sitting with. I stopped at a rest stop in western Pennsylvania at 11:20 p.m., yellow overhead light, a vending machine to my left, the smell of institutional coffee from a machine I didn't use. I sat at a plastic table and I opened my banking app. $3,000 a month, 60 months, $180,000, 5 years of transfers to a joint account in Ohio, held in my parents' names, initiated by me every first of the month with the reliability of a utility payment. Never missed, never late, because my parents needed it, for insulin, for roof repairs, for the thousand small financial emergencies that come with being a retired couple living on fixed income in a house that was 20 years past its last major renovation. That was what I had believed. $180,000 gone somewhere. Not to my mother, not to my father. Somewhere. I sat under that yellow light and felt something I am not used to feeling. The specific physical sensation of the ground-changing shape beneath a structure I had built my life on top of. Then I drove the rest of the way home in the same silence. I did not sleep. My name is Beverly Goodwin. I am the CFO of a financial services firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have held that title for 7 years, which means I spend most of my professional life in the space between what numbers say and what people believe about them. And I have developed over those years a particular intolerance for the gap. I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, the second of 2 children, in a family that had a story it told about itself, and a reality that did not always match. The story was, Michael is the golden one, surgeon, respected, the child who made it. Beverly is fine, capable, reliable, probably doing well enough. The story never changed, even as my career quietly exceeded Michael's by most measurable metrics, because the story was not about metrics. It was about something older and more fixed than that. Michael Patrick Goodwin, 42, was a cardiologist at a hospital in Cleveland. He had the kind of life that photographed well, the prestigious title, the beautiful wife Lauren, the house in a suburb that had a good school district and a long driveway. He had charm of the specific variety that works better in person than it stands up to scrutiny, the kind that fills a room at a holiday dinner and fills a hospital hallway, and had been filling my mother's understanding of her children for 4 decades. He had also, it would turn out, filled a sports book in Delaware with $180,000 of my money, but I didn't know that yet. What I knew, driving back from western Pennsylvania at midnight, was that the money I had been sending for 5 years had not arrived. And I am a CFO. I don't panic about money. I find out where it went. The first thing I noticed, and I mean the first thing I noticed in retrospect, looking back at the architecture of what I had missed, was the insulin conversation in 2019. My mother had called me in March to say that my father's insulin had become expensive and that they weren't sure how to manage it going forward. I asked her the specific cost. She gave me a number. It was high, and I made a note of it. And a week later, I set up the monthly transfer and told her it was for the insulin and whatever else came up. She had said, "Beverly, you don't have to do that." I had said, "I know, I want to." 3 months later, in June, I mentioned the transfer during a call, and she said something I had cataloged as confusion, and now had to recatalog as evidence. She said vaguely that things were about the same, and that they were managing all right. I had interpreted that as polite deflection, the particular way my parents had always not quite accepted help directly. I had not interpreted it as a woman who did not know a transfer was occurring. I should have pressed. I didn't. The second thing I missed was Michael at Christmas 2020. He had been in an unusually good mood, expansive, generous, the version of him that surfaces when things are going well and he wants an audience for them. He had bought my parents a new television, made a show of setting it up. My father had been visibly moved by the gesture. My mother had looked at Michael with the expression she reserved for him specifically. I had gone home and felt, I will admit, a specific and small sourness about that. The particular flavor of being the one who sends invisible money every month while your brother buys a television and gets the look. I told myself I was being petty. I wasn't being petty. I was noticing something real. I just didn't know what I was noticing. The third thing I missed was Lauren. Michael's wife had always been pleasant with me in a guarded way. The way people are pleasant when they know something you don't and aren't sure whether to feel guilty about it. I had attributed this to normal sister-in-law ambivalence. There had been a moment at Easter 2021 where she had looked at me across the table with an expression I couldn't read, something between wanting to say something and having decided not to, and then looked away. I had not followed up. I had not followed up on any of these things because I was a person who trusted the story my family told, because I had been told that story so many times and in so many ways that it had become indistinguishable from the furniture. Michael was the golden one. Beverly was fine. Beverly was reliable. Beverly sent money home and nobody needed to acknowledge it because that was simply Beverly's role. I had let myself be furniture until the chuckle. Marcus Webb's office was 2 floors below mine. He had been our compliance officer for 8 years, and before that had spent 22 years in financial oversight at firms where people had significantly more motivation to hide things than they typically do at a financial services company in Cambridge. He had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades sitting across from individuals who are hoping to talk their way past something. He let you say the hard part yourself without filling the silence for you. I closed his door on a Tuesday morning. I sat down. He waited. 5 years of wire transfers from my private account to a joint account in Ohio, I said. My parents' names are on the account. My brother is the authorized signer. The account holder my parents believed was managing the funds confirms she has received nothing from this account in 5 years. Marcus set down his tea. Beverly. His voice was measured. He's a connected party. Family relationship creates a conflict of interest in any formal review. I know. I wanted on record that I disclosed the relationship before the ticket was opened. You understand what happens if there's a finding. I looked at him. Lupin legal from the beginning. I want a paper trail that could be read aloud in a federal courtroom without a single gap. He held my gaze for a moment, then he opened his laptop. Give me the account numbers. The 3 weeks between opening the ticket and receiving the audit results were the longest 3 weeks I had experienced since a deal restructuring in 2018 that had required me to function normally in public while managing something privately that I could not discuss with anyone. I am good at compartmentalization. I had been trained in it by my family and then formally by my career, and I could move through meetings and conference calls and staff reviews without any of it showing on the surface. Underneath the surface, a different set of calculations was running continuously. I thought about the transfers. $180,000 sent in good faith to a joint account I had never asked to see the statements for because I had trusted that the mechanism was working. I had never asked my parents directly, did the money arrive? I had trusted the architecture of it, the account, the names on it, the implicit understanding that Michael, as the local one, the one who saw them regularly, was managing the practical side of the arrangement. He was managing it. He just wasn't managing it the way I had understood. I thought about my mother's face when she said what money. The pure, unperformed confusion of a woman who had been told a completely different story about what her daughter did and didn't provide. What had Michael told her? That I didn't help? That I had offered and then not followed through? Or simply nothing? Simply a sustained silence that allowed the impression to form and calcify on its own? I thought about all the dinners, all the Michael is doing so well conversations, all the ways my mother's voice changed when she talked about him, softer, more certain, the voice of a woman describing something that made her feel safe. I had always attributed the difference in how she talked about us to favoritism, the ordinary, infuriating, common favoritism of parents who had chosen a favorite and weren't going to pretend otherwise. Now I was entertaining a different possibility, that she didn't know. That the woman who had chuckled at me across the holiday table had been doing so with a completely false picture of her 2 children, constructed over years by the one who was better at managing her perception. That didn't make the chuckle hurt less. It made it hurt differently. Marcus's email arrived at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Subject, audit results. Ticket 2024 GW 117. Confidential. I was on my couch in Cambridge with a glass of wine I stopped drinking when I saw the subject line. I opened it on my laptop. The audit was 43 pages. I read all 43. 5 years of wire logs. $180,000 in. $180,000 out. 187 separate outgoing transfers. To a sports book registered in Delaware operating under a digital license. To a cryptocurrency exchange. 3 separate wallets. Multiple transactions. The kind of structure that suggests someone who had been advised on obfuscation or had simply learned it by doing. A handful of smaller transfers to what appeared to be personal accounts, later identified by legal as belonging to individuals associated with private gambling networks. 0 to my mother. 0 to my father. 0 to insulin. 0 to roof repairs. 0 to any vendor, any utility, any contractor, any bill. Every cent. Gone. I sat with that for a long time. My brother hadn't stolen from me exactly, or rather, he had, but the mechanism of it was more specific than simple theft. He had stolen through me. My parents were the story. I was the pipeline. He was the drain. For 5 years, he had maintained a joint account in our parents' names, positioned himself as the authorized manager of it, intercepted my monthly transfers, and fed them into a gambling habit that had apparently been running at industrial scale while he stood at holiday tables in a pressed shirt, smiling his hospital hallway smile. My parents were the excuse. They hadn't even known they were being used as one. I closed the laptop. I sat in my apartment for a long time in the specific quiet that follows the collapse of a structural assumption, the kind that has been load-bearing for so long that you haven't been thinking about it. You've just been living on top of it. Then Lauren found me at a conference. She had known I would be there. I found out later she had checked the speaker list and driven 4 hours to be in that lobby at that particular time, which tells you something about the quality of her desperation, and also, frankly, her nerve. She looked thinner than I remembered, and she had the specific brightness in the eyes of someone running on adrenaline and a decision they've recently made and aren't taking back. She said, I need 5 minutes. We found a corner off the main hall near a window that looked out on a parking structure. She was filing for divorce. She had found $74,000 missing from their home equity equity line of credit over the previous 2 years. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. She had gone to a financial attorney in Cleveland, a man named David Park, 18 years in asset recovery, and he had traced the withdrawals to the same cryptocurrency exchange structure that appeared in Marcus's audit. She slid her phone across the table. A text message, sent by Michael to a contact saved as R at 11:47 p.m. 2 years earlier. My sister thinks she's funding mom's insulin. LMAO. I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time. The 3-word addition at the end, LAMO, was the thing that did something specific to the temperature in my chest, not the theft. I had been processing the theft for 3 weeks, and I had developed over those weeks a kind of working relationship with its dimensions. But the LMAO was different. The LMAO was the text of a man who had not just stolen from his sister, but had found the theft amusing, had taken the gap between what I believed I was doing and what was actually happening, and turned it into a joke for someone he trusted more than he was worried about his phone records. I handed Lauren's phone back. Send me a copy, I said. She did, right there at the table. I printed it. I filed it. I added it to a folder that was becoming, by then, quite thick. I did not cry. There would be time for that later. There is still time for that later, honestly. But not at a conference table in a hotel lobby in front of a woman who needed me functional. The charity gala was 6 weeks away. The Goodwin Cardiology Wing at the hospital in Cleveland, named for our family, funded by my firm's $18 million pledge that I had negotiated personally over 2 years of conversations with the hospital foundation. 300 people. Black tie. The kind of event that existed at the intersection of medicine and money and civic reputation, where the guest list was assembled with the same care as the seating chart and the program was printed on paper heavy enough that you felt it when you held it. I had been sent an advance copy of the program for approval. Page 7. Matching gifts section. A listing in the same gold foil embossing used for the lead donors. Dr. Michael A. Goodwin. Personal matching gift, $250,000. I read it twice. I called our foundation's records department. No pledge documentation, no payment received, no correspondence on file from Dr. Michael Goodwin regarding a personal matching gift of any amount. The listing was a fabrication, printed on hospital foundation letterhead, submitted through the matching gift portal using Michael's hospital email address and credentials, formatted to be indistinguishable from a legitimate pledge, because the process relied on good faith, because nobody at a hospital foundation vets the matching gifts of a cardiologist with his name on the wing against a forensic audit. He had submitted a fraudulent pledge to attach his name to a wing being funded by my firm's money, my firm, my name, my 2 years of work. I called Helena Marsh, the foundation director, 27 years in nonprofit management, a woman who had built the hospital's giving program from a small annual fund into a $100 million operation, and who had the kind of institutional reputation that made what I was about to tell her land with weight. Helena, I need to ask you to hold the matching donor announcement until after my opening remarks. Silence on the line. Beverly, her voice was careful. What is happening? I don't know the full shape of it yet, I said. I will in 2 weeks. What I know right now is that at least one listing in the program may not be supported by documentation. Another silence. Longer. Tell me what you need from me, she said. That was the moment I understood that the gala was going to be the place. Not because I planned a scene. I want to be clear about this. I am not a person who designs public humiliation as a strategy. What I am is a CFO who understands that certain truths require a specific kind of witness to become immovable, that some facts, presented in the right room, in front of the right people, with the right documentation behind them, become impossible to reframe, impossible to minimize, impossible to absorb into the family story and redistribute as Beverly being difficult. This truth needed a room. I spent 6 weeks preparing for it. I wore charcoal wool, my grandmother's diamond earrings, small, precise, not a statement, nothing that could be read as revenge, nothing that performed anything. I was not there to wound anyone. I was there to correct the record, which is a thing I have spent my career doing, and which I have learned to do without personal affect because the record doesn't require affect to be true. The gala was at the hospital's event center on the 7th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline visible, 300 people in black tie gathered under lights that made everyone look, briefly, like the best version of themselves. I had attended 2 previous galas for this project. I knew the room. I knew where the microphone was. I knew where Helena would be standing. I also knew, because I had arranged it with Helena the previous week, where a woman named Diane Cho would be standing. Diane Cho was a compliance officer at the hospital's legal department, 14 years in healthcare law, seconded to the foundation for the evening at Helena's request. She was in a black suit near the exit closest to the main hallway. Michael was at table 4. I had checked the seating chart. I found my parents first. Table 7, my mother in the blue dress she wore to things she considered important. My father beside her looking slightly uncomfortable in his formal wear in the way he always had. My mother saw me and smiled, the uncomplicated smile of a woman who did not yet know what the next 15 minutes contained. I smiled back. I went to the microphone. At 8:15 I began. Good evening. I want to start by thanking Helena Marsh and the entire foundation team for what they have built here. A cardiology program that will serve this community for generations, funded by the generosity of the people in this room. The room was warm and attentive. People held their glasses. The chandeliers were doing their job. Before we proceed to the donor recognition, I need to make one correction to the printed program. The room did not go quiet exactly. It shifted, the way a room shifts when someone has said something that doesn't fit the expected sequence. The $250,000 matching gift attributed on page 7 to Dr. Michael Goodwin has not been received by this foundation. Our compliance office has confirmed that no personal pledge documentation exists for this amount, and the listing will be withdrawn from the program and from all published materials. I did not look at table 4 yet. I also want to share something that that is relevant to the people in this room, many of whom have contributed to initiatives connected to the Goodwin family name. I paused. Exactly one beat. For 5 years, I transferred $3,000 a month from my personal account to a joint family account intended for my parents' care. A forensic audit conducted by my firm's compliance department has documented that none of those funds, $180,000 in total, reached my parents. The audit has traced their diversion through a sports book in Delaware and a cryptocurrency exchange. The matter has been referred to outside counsel and to the appropriate financial authorities. I looked at my mother. She was very still. My parents did not know, I said. They were told a story for as long as I was told a story. The story was different for both of us and false for both of us. And I want that on the record in this room because there are people here who know my family, and I will not allow them to carry the wrong understanding of this away with them tonight. I looked at table 4. Michael was not sitting. He was standing, his chair pushed back, his body already angled toward the exit in the way of a man who has made a calculation and is acting on it. The same quality of movement I had watched him deploy at family dinners his entire life. The ability to leave a room before the room could turn to look at him. He took 2 steps. Diane Cho, in her black suit, was already moving from the wall toward the exit, quietly, efficiently, the way compliance officers move when they are doing their job. She stepped into his path. He stopped. He turned once and looked back at the room. At 300 people in black tie who were very still and very quiet and looking directly at him. At Helena Marsh's face. At our parents at table 7. My mother's hand on my father's arm. Her expression doing something I had never seen it do before. He turned back to Diane. He did not turn around again. Michael was placed on administrative leave by the hospital the following week, pending investigation into the fraudulent pledge submission and a separate inquiry into his hospital expense account that Diane Cho's review had flagged as a separate matter. His medical license was not revoked immediately. These things take time and process, and the process is, as it should be, deliberate. But the inquiry was opened, which is the beginning of the process that matters. Lauren's divorce attorney, working with David Park, filed for the full recovery of the $74,000 missing from the home equity line as part of the asset division. Park filed an additional civil claim on my behalf for the $180,000. Criminal referral to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was made by Marcus's team in December. Wire fraud across state lines, a federal matter, which has a different set of consequences than a civil finding. My mother called me 2 days after the gala. I had been waiting for that call in the way you wait for a thing you need but don't know how it will feel when it arrives. She called at 7:15 in the morning, which was when she always called when something mattered, and I picked up on the second ring. She was quiet for a long time before she spoke. I said something cruel to you at the table, she said. A stupid, cruel thing. And you had been— Her voice stopped, started again. You had been sending money home for 5 years. Yes, I said. I didn't know. I know you didn't. Beverly, a long pause. I've been telling a story about you and your brother for 30 years, and he told me things. About you. That you weren't. That you didn't. She stopped again. He told me things. I sat with that. I know, I said. I don't know how to— Her voice broke briefly. I don't know how to go back through 30 years and look at it differently. You don't have to do it all at once, I said. It was not the conversation that fixed everything. There is no conversation that fixes 30 years of a false story, and I am not someone who believes in clean resolutions to structural problems that took decades to build. What I believe in is the audit, the patient, documented process of finding out where things actually went. My mother and I are in the early stages of a different kind of audit. It is slow. It is sometimes painful. It is the most real conversation we have had in 38 years. I'll take it. The Goodwin Cardiology Wing opened in the spring. The program was reprinted. Page 7 had one name on it in the matching gifts section. Mine. At the opening ceremony, Helena introduced me to the room, and when she said my name, there was a particular quality to how the room responded. Not the polished, performative applause of a fundraising event, but something more specific. The sound of people who knew the full story offering the acknowledgement it deserved. I stood at the microphone and I looked for my mother's face. She was in the 3rd row. She was not chuckling. She was looking at me the way I had spent 38 years wanting to be looked at, like someone who sees what is actually there. It was not everything. It was enough. I lost my job. My sister's first words were about her car payment. My parents packed my room before I'd even sat down. I never mentioned the company in my name or the beach house. By morning, their whole world had quietly fallen apart. Who's going to pay my car loan now? That's what my sister said. Not are you okay? Not what happened? My car loan. I'd been laid off for exactly 90 minutes, and that was the first sentence anyone in my family said to my face. I'm Joanna Sinclair. I'm 34, and by the time I drove to my parents' house that evening to tell them in person, they already knew. And my father was already packing my bedroom into a cardboard box. Let me back up, because it took 15 years to build the version of this family that could do that to me in under an hour. For 15 years, I was the family bank, not a metaphor. A functioning, monthly, automated financial institution with a single depositor and 3 withdrawal points. I paid my parents' mortgage, $2,400 a month, on time, every month, since I was 22 years old and 3 months into my first real finance job. I picked up my father's health insurance premium after his hours got cut at the plant 8 years ago. $780 a month, a number I know the way other people know their own birthday. I even co-signed my younger sister after Megan's car loan 2 years back. After 2 solid weeks of my mother's silent treatment taught me, more effectively than any conversation could have, exactly what the word no cost in that house. Over 15 years, by my own conservative accounting, I sent home roughly $340,000. Nobody ever kept a receipt. Nobody ever, not once, said thank you. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it's the specific, quantifiable shape of the thing that happened to me, and numbers, unlike feelings, don't get to be argued with later. What nobody in that house knew, because nobody in that house had ever once asked me a question that didn't end in a dollar amount attached to somebody else's need, was what I did with the rest of my life. 6 years ago, I quietly co-founded a financial advisory firm with a business partner named Greg Ashcroft, a guy I'd met at a conference and trusted enough to bet a second mortgage on. Real clients, real revenue, growing every year. An entire professional identity, built in the hours after I got off the phone with my mother, that not a single person in my family had ever asked me a single question about. I told myself for years that the silence about my own life was just how my family operated. Private, undemonstrative, not big on conversation. I told myself that the checks I sent home were simply what a good daughter did. The way you tell yourself a lot of things when the alternative is admitting you've been quietly bleeding for over a decade and calling it love. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, I was laid off. 60 employees, company-wide restructuring, a severance package, and a box for my desk items. The whole thing over in about 40 minutes. The specific, brutal efficiency of corporate downsizing in a company that had, until that morning, called me a top performer. I drove straight to my parents' house afterwards, still in my work blazer, to tell them in person before they heard it some other way. I remember thinking, on the drive over, that I actually wanted comfort. I hadn't wanted comfort from that house in longer than I could remember, and some small, stubborn part of me was hoping this might finally be the moment that changed. I walked in and Megan was already sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand. "So it's true you got fired?" she said, not looking up. Then, to our mother, as if I weren't standing 4 feet away, "Who's going to pay my car loan now?" My mother set down her teacup with the specific, deliberate calm of a woman chairing a meeting she'd already decided the outcome of. "Joanna, sit. We need to talk." They already knew. I understood that in the same instant I understood the second part. They'd known for hours, apparently, and had spent that time not calling me, not texting me, but sitting at that kitchen table eating lemon squares and discussing my unemployment like a line item on a shared spreadsheet before I'd even finished clearing out my desk. "Megan needs a proper room," my mother said, as if this were the natural next sentence in a conversation about my job loss. "You're barely home anyway. It makes more sense for her to have yours." I walked down the hall toward my old bedroom on legs that didn't entirely feel like mine. Half my bookshelf was already empty. My college graduation photo, the only photograph of me hanging anywhere in that house, in a house covered wall to wall with pictures of Megan, was gone. Just a bare nail where it used to hang. A small pale rectangle on the paint where the frame had blocked the sun for 11 years. My father walked past me in the hallway carrying a cardboard box, already halfway packed. Shirts, a jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother, my old ceramic coffee mug, the one with the chip in the handle I'd had since college. "Dad, look at me." He didn't. "Your sister needs this house more than you do, Joanna," he said, still walking, still packing. "You'll be fine. You're always fine." 4 words, 15 years, summarized. Joanna pays the mortgage. She's fine. Joanna gets laid off and evicted from her childhood bedroom the same afternoon. She's fine. I carried both boxes to my car myself. Nobody followed me outside. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before I even turned the key, staring at my parents' front door, waiting for it to open, for someone to come out and say they were sorry, that this had gotten out of hand, that of course I could stay. The door stayed closed. I drove to a gas station 2 miles away and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I called Greg. "The Austin office?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Is there room for me?" There was. Greg had been talking about expanding our advisory practice into Texas for over a year, and I'd always found a reason to say, not yet, not now, some quiet excuse tied to a family obligation I'd never fully explained to him. This time, I didn't give myself an excuse. 2 weeks later, I was 3 states away, running the Austin branch of my own company, sleeping in a corporate short-term rental with exactly 4 boxes of belongings, and the autopay was still quietly draining $3,830 a month out of my personal checking account into a house that had, less than a month earlier, erased the only photograph of me it had ever displayed. I want to be honest about why I didn't cut it off immediately. 15 years of automatic loyalty doesn't switch off just because your legs finally carry you out the door. Some old, tired part of me kept thinking, even in Austin, even sleeping on a rented mattress, that maybe this was temporary, that maybe someone would call and it would be different. On day 16, Megan finally called, not to check on me, not to ask where I'd gone. "So my car insurance is due next week," she said, without so much as a hello. "Can you handle it? Do you know where I am right now?" I asked. A pause, the particular pause of someone flipping through a mental Rolodex that had never once needed to hold my address. "I don't know. Nashville? Wherever. I'm in Austin, Texas," I said. "I've been gone 2 weeks." "Okay, cool," she said, entirely unbothered. "So, about the insurance?" That was the moment. Not the boxes on the front lawn, not the bare nail on the wall where my only photograph used to hang. This, my own sister, informed I'd relocated across 3 state lines, responding with a follow-up question about her car insurance, as though I were a customer service line she'd been placed on hold with. I opened my laptop that night in the rented apartment and wrote an email with no emotion in it at all. No accusations, no explanation. I wrote it the way I write client termination letters. Clean, factual, final. Effective May 1st, I will be discontinuing the following recurring payments: mortgage assistance, $20 $2,400 month. Health insurance premium, $780 month. Auto loan payment, $650 month. This provides 30 days notice to make alternate arrangements. I CC'd all three of them, my mother, my father, and Megan, on the same email, so there'd be no version of the story later where one of them claimed they hadn't known, or where the request quietly got passed along, softened, blamed on someone else. I signed it with my full name. Not love, not your daughter, just Joanna Sinclair. Then I closed the laptop and slept 7 consecutive hours for the first time in longer than I could remember. By 7 a.m., I had 14 missed calls from my mother, 6 from my sister, 2 from my father, 26 messages waiting across 3 inboxes and a voicemail. Not one of them said, "Are you okay?" I read every single message, standing in my kitchenette with coffee going cold in my hand, cataloging them the way I catalog a client's spending history. Not with anger exactly, more with a strange, clinical curiosity about what 15 years of extraction actually sounds like once the extraction stops. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, made a second cup of coffee, and let May 1st arrive exactly as scheduled. 6 weeks later, my mother found out I owned a company. Not from me, but from a Facebook post about our Austin office opening that a mutual acquaintance shared into her church group chat. According to my Aunt Carla, the one relative who's kept a careful, sympathetic line of contact with me through all of this, my mother read the post out loud at the kitchen table. Her face went white, then red, then completely still. That night, at dinner, she said 4 words to my father that Aunt Carla later relayed to me, word for word over the phone. "We're going to Austin." I didn't invite them. I found out the hard way in the middle of my company's grand opening event, when the front door of our new office swung open and 50 guests, clients, local business contacts, a reporter from the Austin Business Journal covering the expansion, watched my mother walk straight across my own office floor toward me, my father trailing a half step behind her. I want to describe what happened next carefully, because it's the part of this story that stopped being just a family matter and became something with actual, verifiable consequences. My mother reached me near the drinks table, in front of at least a dozen people close enough to hear every word. "Joanna," she said, loud enough to carry, "how could you just abandon your family and hide this from us?" I kept my voice level, the way I'd learned to during 6 years of client meetings where staying calm was the entire job. "I didn't hide anything, Mom. Nobody ever asked. We're your parents," my father said. "You owe us." That word, "owe," landed differently in a room full of my actual clients than it ever had in that kitchen back home. I saw a few polite, uncomfortable glances exchanged near the bar. "I've paid this family $340,000 over 15 years, I said, quietly enough that it stayed between the 4 or 5 people standing closest, though I knew it wouldn't stay contained for long in a room like that. "I don't owe anyone anything else." My mother's composure, the one she'd walked in with, started to crack in stages. First indignant, then wounded, then, when neither of those got the reaction she wanted, sharp. "You always thought you were better than this family," she said, "sitting on all this money while your sister struggles." It was Greg, my business partner, who stepped in at that point. Not aggressively, just with the calm authority of someone who'd built a company on knowing exactly when a conversation needed a professional third party. "I think this might be better continued privately," he said, guiding them with practiced ease toward the small conference room off the main floor. My office manager, a sharp, unflappable woman named Denise Okafor, quietly pulled me aside once the 3 of us, my parents and I, were behind the conference room's glass wall, visible but not audible to the party still going on outside. "Joanna, whatever you need," she said. "I've already told the reporter this is a private family matter, off the record, and I've got the office's security footage running, just so there's a record, given how this walked in." That single sentence, "given how this walked in," told me everything about how the scene had already looked from the outside, before I'd said a word. Inside the conference room, my father tried a different approach, softer, the kind of tone he used to use when I was small and he wanted something. "Joanna, sweetheart, we didn't come here to fight. We came because we miss you." "You came because Mom saw a Facebook post," I said. He didn't argue that. That, more than anything, told me I was right. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. My mother, unable to hold the wounded tone for long, pivoted back to numbers, which had always been the family's true native language, whether or not anyone admitted it. "You have all this," she said, gesturing vaguely at the glass walls, the office, the 50 guests visible through them. "And you can't spare a fraction of it for your own sister's car payment?" I pulled a printed document out of my bag. I'd brought it on instinct, half expecting some version of this conversation the moment Aunt Carla told me they were driving down. It was a full accounting I'd prepared weeks earlier with the help of an actual forensic accountant I'd hired through my own firm's network, Rachel Bayan, CPA, CFE, specifically because I suspected, correctly, it would eventually matter to have the number bulletproof rather than just remembered. "Here's the actual total," I said, sliding it across the table. $340,000, itemized month by month, going back 15 years, mortgage payments, insurance premiums, the car loan I co-signed for Megan, which, by the way, means my credit is still legally tied to a loan I no longer control payments on, since I'm not the one driving that car. My father's face changed as he scanned the page. Not shame exactly, more the specific shock of seeing an abstraction turned concrete. "I also want to mention," I added, "that co-signing without a formal agreement means Megan missing a payment doesn't just hurt her credit, it hurts mine." Rachel flagged that as a real liability risk, given that nobody's made a payment on time in the 6 weeks since I stopped covering it. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. There was, for the first time in the entire conversation, nothing readily available in her usual script for this specific fact. "I'm not the family bank anymore," I told them, and I said it plainly, without raising my voice, the way you state a policy rather than a punishment. "I built something real, on my own, in the hours nobody in that house ever asked me a single question about. I'm proud of it. I'm not going to apologize for having it, and I'm not going to fund a household that packed my bedroom into boxes before I'd even lost my job for an hour. So that's it? My mother said. You're just done with us? I'm done being your bank, I said. Those are different things, Mom. If you want a relationship with me that isn't about a monthly transfer, I'm open to that. I'd actually like that. But it starts with someone in this family asking me a real question about my life instead of my bank balance. My father, quiet for a long moment, finally said something I hadn't expected. The mortgage is 2 months behind, he admitted, his voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. We don't know what we're going to do. I felt something complicated move through me. Not triumph, and not quite the old automatic guilt either. Something new and uncomfortable in between. I can give you the contact information for a housing counselor, I said. There are legitimate assistance programs for exactly this situation. I'll help you find the resources. I won't be the resource myself, not anymore. They left the conference room without much more said. Denise walked them out through a side exit, away from the remaining guests, with the same quiet professionalism she brought to everything else that night. The mortgage on my parents' house did fall behind. According to Aunt Carla, they eventually worked out a loan modification through a HUD-approved housing counselor I'd pointed them toward. A longer process than what my $2,400 a month had been quietly smoothing over for years, but a real sustainable one that didn't run through me. Megan's car was repossessed 4 months after I sent that final email. A fact I learned not from her, but from the same church group chat that had originally exposed my company to my mother. Small town circuits apparently running in both directions. She's since been making payments on a much older, much cheaper car she bought outright, with cash from a retail job. The first job, as far as I know, she's held longer than 4 months in over a decade. My relationship with my parents remains 6 months later, distant and uneven. Occasional calls, mostly initiated by my father, who has slowly started asking questions about my actual life that have nothing to do with money. My mother and I have spoken twice since the grand opening, both times brief, both times careful, both times ending without resolution, but also notably without another request for cash. Rachel Bayon's forensic accounting, as it turned out, mattered beyond that one conference room conversation. I used the same documentation, 6 weeks later, to formally remove my name from Megan's original auto loan through a hardship refinance process the lender offered once presented with the full payment history, finally severing the last piece of financial exposure I hadn't realized was still quietly attached to me. The Austin office has grown to 11 employees. Greg and I opened a third location this spring, in Denver, and I flew out for the ribbon cutting with a strange, settled kind of pride I don't think I would have recognized in myself a year earlier. Pride that didn't come with an automatic, reflexive urge to minimize it the moment I felt it. I hung my college graduation photo in my new office, the same one that had disappeared off my parents' hallway wall the day I lost my job. It sits on a shelf behind my desk now, next to a photo of the Austin team on opening night, and it doesn't feel like a wound anymore when I look at it. It feels more like a marker, the last photograph of me that anyone else decided where to hang. Aunt Carla still calls every few weeks, and she's the one who told me, gently, a few months ago, that my mother had started telling people at church that I was doing so well for myself these days. A sentence, Carla pointed out, that had never once, in 34 years, been said about me while I was actually the one paying for everyone else's roof. I didn't need the apology to feel like it landed correctly. I just needed, finally, for the math to stop running only one direction. They spent 15 years asking me for money and never once asking how I was. Now, for the first time, the silence runs the other way, and it's the quietest, most peaceful thing I've ever paid for.